Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. It should be a great late night Friday, earlier than usual, but later, 10 p.m. chat, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time chat tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Let's do it.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. So, for those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things, what we do here is I give my opening remarks. And then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you. We do names and locations. We get to find out who it is on the other side of the camera. And then after that, after the roll call, after the opening remarks, that is when I start answering your super chat questions. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send me a super chat. That's all you got to do. Send me a super chat and I will make a point to address it. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Make sure that if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, you send me a super chat. I will type it down, and then in the second half of the show, I will answer it. So welcome, everybody. Glad you're here, and I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks for tonight. Folks, today, I did a few things. I had an interview with Sputnik Radio. I did some work for my job. Had an opportunity to have a nice meal with my wife. And then I took a stroll around my neighborhood here in Brooklyn. And I was thinking about many different things as I was walking. And as I was strolling and walking and thinking, something occurred to me that must be said. Because I think this is something that maybe needs to be clarified. When we talk about socialist patriotism and loving one's country and being motivated by love for one's country, we have to not look at this as merely some kind of manipulative rhetorical device, because I have a feeling, in fact, I know that there are some people who see it this way. They see it as some kind of manipulation. All right? The majority of people who call themselves communists are trying to outwoke everyone else on the internet. They're trying to go, I'm super revolutionary. Yeah, well, I'm super duper revolutionary. Yeah, well, I'm super duper ultra revolutionary. Right? So, of course, you have to denounce patriotism. Yeah, I'm so revolutionary, I hate the American flag. Yeah, well, I'm so revolutionary that I hate the American flag and the Bible. Yeah, well, I'm so revolutionary. I mean, it's this childishness. It's performative politics. These people have no aspiration to build any real political movement, to actually make an impact and win over the American people. They are simply virtue signaling and performing on the internet and grandstanding about how anti-patriotic they are is part of the performance. But there are some that understand that to most Americans, communicating hatred for America is not a winning message. If I was in Brazil, I would not say to the Brazilian people, fuck Brazil. If I was in Iran, I would not say to the Iranian people, fuck Iran. So if I am in the United States trying to build a mass movement for socialism, I would not say fuck America. Now, there are some people, I think, who get that, kind of. They kind of get this. And they think, whoa, Caleb is always noticed that communists are accused of being unpatriotic. So he flipped it around. He did some jujitsu. He flipped it around. And he said, actually, we communists are the true patriots because communism will make America a better country. So he flipped the script on him. He's being tricky there. I like that. I can be tricky. I can be manipulative. We're the real patriots, man. Yeah. No, we're patriotic communist. They think it's a rhetorical device. They think it's some kind of manipulation. Right? They think it's some kind of some kind of psychological trick, some kind of that's what they think it is. And I want you to know that if that is your approach to socialist patriotism, number one, you don't get it. And number two, it is not going to have the intended effect. You have to really love the American people. You have to really love the American people, all of them. Urban and rural, Southern, Midwestern, coastal, Pacific Northwest. You have to really love the American people. Thank you, Lisa. You have to really love the American people. Because what is behind the anti-patriotism of so many of the leftists? And I'm talking about leftists here. I'm not talking about black nationalists. I'm not talking about indigenous people. I'm talking about people whose orientation is to build a multinational working class movement to move the United States towards socialism. When they are anti-patriotic, what that's really an expression of is anger and frustration at the people that they are trying to win over. It is anger, it is resentment, it is hostility, it is believing that they are the problem. It's blaming them for the things that you're upset about. And it's expressing a statement of alienation, a statement of, I don't belong here. I wipe my hands of this. I am not part of this. I am morally pure. I condemn. It's a statement of hostility, of alienation. That's what's motivating a lot of the people that are anti-patriotic. And it's basically they're giving a middle finger to their neighbors, the people in their community. They're just basically saying, I'm not like you. I feel alienated. I'm angry. They're flipping the bird to their neighborhood, their community, to everyone they're around and saying, I am different. I am different. I am unique. You all suck. That's what they're doing. And that's not a winning attitude, obviously. However, if you just still think that way, but you have this sly, oh, we're going to pretend we're the real patriots. I get it, Caleb. I get it. They're going to think we're the real patriots. They won't see that coming, right? They'll call us unpatriotic, and we'll pull out our socialist patriotism flags. We'll show them the video of our conferences happening with the national anthem, and they'll be totally thrown off. They'll be confused. You can't look at it that way. You cannot look at it that way. Because if you look at it that way, number one, you don't get it. And number two, it's not going to work. The reason that it's not going to work is because if we were to simply pretend to be patriotic while harboring contempt for the American people, we would be no different than Hillary Rodham Clinton. We would be no different than Nikki Haley. We would be no different than Ron DeSantis. We would be no different than Joe Biden. All the politicians, for the most part, hate the American people. And all the politicians, for the most part, pretend to be patriotic. So thinking that we can somehow get the upper hand by doing that is an illusion. And the reason there is such contempt for the political class in the United States, the reason there's such alienation from the government apparatus, the reason things like conspiracy theories are so popular these days, the reason that Donald Trump would win the next election if he's allowed to run, if it were held today, the reason for that is because the American people know this. They know their politicians don't care about them. They don't love the communities and the hardworking families of this country. They are allowing the country to crumble and to fall apart. They're allowing the country to be devastated by a decaying system. They're allowing the prison industrial complex to eat up the lives of millions of young Americans. They're allowing big pharmaceutical corporations to make profits from addicting Americans to dangerous medications, to overprescribe opioids, to push doctors to overprescribe them. They're watching this country fall apart in its economic foundations and its infrastructure. They're watching this country deplete all of its resources in escalating tensions, occupying countries, destroying countries, overthrowing governments around the world. They don't care about the American people. They don't love the American people. They have no desire to make the life of the American people any better. They are grifting. If there ever was a grift, that's what the political class of the United States is doing. It is a grift if there ever was one. They're grifting. They're positioning themselves. They're making deals with Satan. They're making deals with Satan. And they don't love the American people. And the American people know that. So you're obviously not going to win over the American people if you tell them to go F themselves, if you tell them that you hate the country, that this is an evil, racist country, that you're better, you don't consider yourself to be an American, you're better than them. America's a racist, evil country, and I'm so revolutionary. You do that, you're obviously not going to win them over. But if you do what regular politicians do and pretend to love the American people, while you maintain your contempt for them, that's not going to work either. When you say that you're a patriotic socialist, you have to mean it. You have to actually love the American people. You have to actually love the American people. You must actually love the American people. You know, I used to work at an insurance company. I remember I read a book that was recommended to me by one of the licensed insurance salesmen at the company. It was a book about marketing. And it actually told this story, which I thought was very amusing. It was that there was a car dealership somewhere in the country, and they couldn't sell any cars. They just could not sell any cars. People would walk in, and they always just didn't feel right. Something didn't feel right to them. And they just couldn't sell any cars. So they hired a marketing consultant to go to the car dealership and help them sell cars. Find out what it was that this car dealership was doing wrong, that no one wanted to buy any cars from them. And so the marketing consultant went to the car dealership. He took all the salesmen into the back room, chatted them up, asked them about their selling. How is it? What do you do? You know, if a family shows up, they want to buy a new car, what do you say to them? He listened to all the salesmen talk, and he immediately knew why they didn't sell any cars. You know why? Because among these car salesmen, they would refer not to the faces of their clients, but among themselves, they would refer to the individuals who came to this car company to buy cars. They would refer to them as mooches. And they had the attitude, we want to get as much money out of these people as we possibly can. And they said, we want a mooch to come to the car dealership. We want a mooch to come to the car dealership. We want a mooch. And that's how they would talk to each other. And of course, they didn't sell any cars. Now, they didn't use this word in front of the customer, but it was how they viewed them. In the back room, all of these salesmen at this car dealership viewed the customer with contempt. They saw all the people who came to their car dealership as people to prey on, as victims. And they were constantly thinking in their head, how can I get the most money out of these suckers that I possibly can? That's what they were thinking. They didn't sell any goddamn cars. And even though they didn't say it, people picked up on it. In their body language, people picked up on it. In the interactions, people could tell. People don't want to be scammed. People don't want to be manipulated. And these salesmen might have been doing everything right, but because they had the attitude, because that is what they saw themselves as doing, they couldn't sell any cars. So the marketing specialist sat down with these car dealers. And he said to them, look, he said, your job is very important. These families need cars. This is America. It's car country. People have to drive to get around. You don't have good public transportation. And you guys know all about what cars would be good for these people. You need to change the way you see yourself in relation to the customer. You're not trying to rip these people off. You're not trying to get as much money out of them as you can. No. You are doing them a favor by helping them get the best car they can possibly get. And you deserve to be compensated for doing them a favor. Yes, you deserve to get your commission as a salesman because you're doing a good thing. You are helping this family to find the car they want. And if you view it that way, your sales will improve. And it worked. Once these salesmen stopped seeing themselves as scammers, as manipulative, and when they started to realize and to see themselves as doing a favor for their customers, when they felt like they earned the commission they got because they were helping their customers, when they generally empathized with the people who walked in, rather than seeing the people who walked in as potential victims, how much money can I get out of them, how can I sell them the most and rip them off, but instead saw them as people that they genuinely wanted to help. When they learned to listen to their customers, to understand why they might want one car rather than another, to listen to what their needs were, then they started to make sales. They started to sell cars. Why? Because they empathized with the people they were working with. No one likes to be scammed. No one likes to be manipulated. No one likes to be conned. No one likes to feel like something's being put over on them. And you can lie all you want. You can lie all you want. And you can pretend that that's not the case. But if deep in your soul, you believe you're screwing somebody, you believe you're putting one over on somebody, you look down on somebody, you think you're better than somebody, you think somebody has nothing to learn from you, you think somebody's worthless. If you feel that way deep in your soul, no matter how many nice words you use, no matter how many times you look in the mirror and practice smiling and being fake, no matter how much, people will pick up on it. A lot of communication, I would say the majority of communication that human beings engage in is not verbal, right? When you go out on a date with somebody, they say either the chemistry is there or it's not. Is that about saying the right things? No. Is that about wearing the right clothes? Nope. It's largely about subconscious ways in which your body language and your tone of voice and the way your eyes move connect with that other person's tone of voice, eyes move, and body language. And you cannot fake it. You can't fake it. If you go out on a date and the chemistry is there, or the chemistry is not, it's not about how well you studied a book about how to be romantic. It doesn't work that way. Either the chemistry is there or it's not. You can't fake it. You cannot fake these kinds of things. You cannot fake these kinds of things. If you want to see a socialist America, you need to really love the American people. You need to really love the American people. You need to really love them. As hard as it might be, as angry as you might be at them for not questioning the government, as angry as you might be at them for going along with things you find to be intolerable, as angry as you might be at the American people for not tuning in to world events and understanding the horrors of imperialism, as angry as you might be, you must make yourself love the American people. If you're serious. Now, if you're not serious, if you just want to sit on the internet and feel good about yourself, feel like you're a big revolutionary, you're great, you're morally superior, go for it, But don't pretend you're in this for real. And don't put down somebody else who does actually take this seriously. If you take this seriously, if you want socialism in America, you must love the American people. That's what you got to do. You must love the American people. You must learn to love the American people. You must craft your socialist message to be one that will make their lives better, that connects with their needs, their feelings, their desires. That's what you got to do. And again, this message is probably of no interest to many people. Many people just want to be performative. Many people just want to be theatrical and just want to feel good about themselves. But again, if you're actually serious, you got to do it a different way. I was thinking about this today because you have to make a decision, right? You have to decide, I really want to see this work. I really want to see socialism come to America. So I've got to really love the American people. And if I think socialism is going to hurt the American people, I shouldn't want socialism. But if I understand that this country is falling apart while the big billionaire bankers and monopolists are planning another war and raking in billions, our living standards are going down, our life expectancy is decreasing, our population is becoming more atomized, more pessimistic, more hopeless. If I really understand that the American people need socialism and the people of the world are anxious for an America that wants to trade with them, that wants to have peace with them and friendship with them, if I really, really can understand that, we have a chance. Look, I've shown this clip before. I think I've shown this clip before, but I want to show it again. If I have it on here, let me see if I've got it right. I think I do. Yeah, here it is. Or no, I don't. Do I? I think I deleted this clip. Okay. Well, the other night I showed a clip, and I'll download it again here. Hold on. I showed a clip of the Canadian communist leader Tim Buck. Now, Tim Buck was the William Z. Foster of Canada. I mean, he was the quintessential communist leader of Canada. He was the Canadian communist leader. He was the face of communism in Canada. He was Mr. Communism, right? Tim Buck, he became the prominent leader of the Communist Party of Canada in the 1930s when it was a massive political party, the political party that recruited Dr. Norman Bethune, who went on to become a hero of the Chinese Revolution, someone that Mao devoted one of his most widely studied essays to, right? And I'm going to put this clip on. It's very short, but this is Tim Buck, a mass leader, a man who led an organization that represented millions of Canadians. Tim Buck. This is Tim Buck. And I want you to not so much listen to the words he's saying, but look at his facial expressions, right? Look at how Tim Buck talks, right? Listen to him. This is a real communist, okay? This is not a teenage LARPer. This is a real communist organizer. Listen to how he talks about Canada. Look at his facial expressions. He's singing the national anthem of Canada. Do you think he's faking it? No, I think he's glowing with patriotism there. But wait till it gets closer.
And the reason why we
look at that smile. Look how happy he is to be speaking to that audience of Canadians. He's warning them about the danger of World War III. Listen to Tim Buck.
We can be so certain that the idea that we fight for is the idea that's going to lead the people of our country is because it is the idea of Canada becoming, the people of Canada becoming their own sovereign selves as a nation. And
look how happy he is about that. Their own sovereign selves as a nation. This guy loves Canada. Tim Buck, the leader of the Communist Party of Canada, he loves Canada. Look at the glowing happiness in his eyes. Look at the happiness.
That the idea that we fight for is the idea that's going to lead the people of our country is because it is the idea of Canada becoming, the people of Canada becoming their own sovereign selves as a nation and leading our country onto the path of peace with all people, friendship with all people, trade with all people, and taking our country out of the camp of imperialist war and fitting it into the camp of peace and progress towards socialism. That's what we're fighting for. We can't lose.
Look at that glow, the smile there. We can't lose. We can't lose. That's what we're fighting for. This is a serious communist. The people of Canada becoming their own sovereign selves. Out of the camp of imperialism and war into the camp of peace and progress towards socialism. This is a real communist.
We can't lose. And sometimes people say to me, well, look, you talk about taking Canada out of the camp of imperialism and war into the camp of peace and socialism. How do you know that the Soviet Union won't start a world war? And my answer is quite simple. The Soviet Union can't start a world war because the Soviet people can carry out their program only in peace. The only thing that could prevent it would be war. And I know that you're going to make sure that there ain't no war. There ain't going to be no war no more.
That's beautiful, right? That is a real communist organizer. And, you know, this one, we don't have a visual of him, but we have his voice. This is William Z. Foster speaking at the height of McCarthyism. This is William Z. Foster. He's speaking at a rally against the Taft-Hartley anti-labor law at a time when the leaders of the Communist Party are indicted. This is William Z. Foster, right? This is an audio recording of William Z. Foster, the great American communist, the man that I have spent years studying because I'm just in awe of him and his life as an organizer. This is an audio recording of William Z. Foster from the 1950s, from the time of McCarthyism. This is William Z. Foster. If the video here will... All right. Okay. If I can get the video to come up here. There we go. All righty. Here's William Z. Foster.
Indignant New Yorkers are inside and outside Madison Square Garden in a giant demonstration demanding the veto and defeat of the Taft-Hartley slave labor bill. Ladies and gentlemen, William Z. Foster.
The Wall Street monopolists with their Taft-Hartley bill are trying to split and devitalize and hamstring the trade unions. The Taft-Hartley bill, moreover, would drastically limit the workers' right to strike. It would authorize the president to break national strikes. It would permit employers once again to use strike-breaking injunctions. Wall Street, with its fascist-like Taft-Hartley bill, also wants to kill the Communist Party. But they will fail in this as in their other anti-labor objectives. The workers, the American people, need a strong Communist Party, and it will be built despite Wall Street profiteers and exploiters.
You have heard
That's great. You know, listen to that. The American people need a strong Communist Party, and it will be built despite profiteers and exploiters. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Beautiful stuff. So I'm just trying to communicate that to all of you. I wanted to start out that way. The other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to let you all know that, as you all remember, a couple weeks ago, it was 2 weeks ago tomorrow, right? So I guess it would be 13 days ago, right? Tomorrow would be 14 days, 2 weeks. 2 weeks before tomorrow, so I guess 13 days prior to now, there was a big we had not a big, but we had a mobilization. The CPI, we had a rally in Union Square of our own with our Rage Against the War Machine allies. And then we marched up to the United Nations to join the Interfaith Peace Rally. So we finally do have video of it. Peter did great work. Shout out to you, Peter, if you're watching. Great video production work of the rally. A long video was just posted on the CPI channel. Just drop the link in the chat. You can watch the whole thing, every single speech at the rally, and you can watch the whole thing. It's an hour and a half long, 1 hour and 35 minutes. You can watch the whole gosh darn thing. We obviously don't have time for that on this stream, but I wanted to show you some of it. I wanted to show you just some of what happened at the rally, just so you get a vibe of it, you know? We're going to skip through it here, and it's a big file, so I'm going to have to share screen rather than upload the video like I did with the other one there. But we're going to watch it. So this is we're going to watch a little bit just so you can see the vibe that was there in Union Square, how we marched up to the UN Peace Rally, etc. So here we go. And
but this war does not suit the American people's interest. Thank you.
Our economic pie. The wealth does not contribute to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the United States. The taxes used for war contribute to the destruction abroad and within the United States. We must realize that the divisive duopoly paradigm of left and right does not exist. We must unite them. Everybody wants life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must realize that we, the people, have the power. We must have peace. Thank you.
So I don't know if people are aware, but this sign refers to the Uhuru movement. These are 4 African-American activists from the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement. They are facing 10 years in prison, charged with being Russian agents. All they did was speak up. All they did was have some Zoom calls, and the American government wants to throw them in prison for 10 years for speaking up, for exercising free speech. And all kinds of civil liberties voices have spoken up and said that what's going on, the charging by the U.S. Department of Justice, the criminal case against the Uhuru movement, is a huge attack on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. If they can charge them just for having some Zoom calls and writing some articles about Ukraine, if they can make that a criminal offense, they can come for you. They can shut down our civil liberties. So we're saying, hands off Uhuru. Drop the charges. Hands off Uhuru. Drop the charges. Hands off Uhuru. Drop the. So we're going to skip ahead. Liam Murphy, who is, he goes by Space LaRouche. He did an amazing job. He just gave an amazing speech. We'll put some of that on. I think we're just speeding ahead here. Yeah, it was a lot of different speakers we had at our afternoon rally. Just kind of speeding ahead. You can watch it all. We don't have time to watch it all on this stream. That's Irene she's the chair of the Delaware Libertarian Party. She was great. Skipping ahead. Here we go.
Hello. Now, I know everyone still remembers the pandemic, and I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I took the time to read this one book. It was called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's by a man known as Klaus Schwab. That man also wrote a book. It was titled The Great Reset. And I was reading this book and I was analyzing it and I was thinking about what the future is going to be looking like, what's going to happen after the wake of this pandemic. And then I was going on YouTube and I wanted to look at some of the videos that Klaus Schwab's organization was putting out. One thing that they predicted was in the future, me and my generation are going to own nothing and be happy about it. That's what they told us. We're going to own nothing and be happy about it. Now, growing up, my parents always tried to teach me that, if I worked hard and I tried my hardest and I did the good, that I would be in a better place because of it. They told me that was what the United States was about, was building us up into a more perfect union. Never did my parents sit me down and tell me, you're not going to have as much money as mom and dad, and you're not going to have a home like mom and dad because Klaus Schwab wants to take it away. Because BlackRock has a right to make money off of homes, but you don't have the right to live in them. And that is the message that we are out here opposing today. Me and my generation are fed up of having our future sold out, of being told that we're going to own nothing and be happy about it, of being told that all of our money that we're ever going to earn is going to be taxed to go send to fight wars, to blow up Somali children, to blow up Yemen, to blow up. Now they're even stupid enough to think that we want to send money to blow up China, a country with nuclear weapons, and a country that is actually building up the world, researching nuclear energy, building hospitals, building high-speed rail, and they want me and the young generation to join the army and die so that they can make more money while they're telling us that we're going to own nothing and be happy about it. I am sick of that bullshit, and that is why we're out here and we're saying that we are going to build our country. We are going to build the world by working together with Russia and China, no matter what the establishment tells us. If the establishment tells us that we're going to own nothing and be happy about it, we're going to march out in the damn streets and we're going to say that we are going to own things, and we are going to be happy about it, and we're not going to fight your foreign imperialist wars anymore. We're going to claim this country as our own again. We're going to go into Wall Street like Jesus went into the temple and tell them to get the hell out of here. We're done with the wars. We're done with owning nothing, and we're tired of these pansy so-called socialists who are telling us that socialism is about everyone having less. Everyone has to consume less. Stop destroying Mother Earth. Stop, wanting to actually be able to own property and buy things. No, that is what socialism is all about. We need to move forward the mode of production into a higher stage. A higher stage with infinite energy from nuclear power. A higher stage where we can expand to Mars. We can expand to Venus. And we can expand beyond that. We can farm asteroids. We can be the most wealthiest generation and the wealthiest period in human history. But it all depends on if we can drain the swamp and get these imperialists the hell out of here and say no to our wars. They know that the contradictions are getting too strong. They know that the American people are tired of having their savings and their lives ripped away. they're scared about that. And that's why they want you to be mad at Russia and China. They want you to be mad at Russia and China instead of the looters that are sitting not very far from here on Wall Street, who are actually getting bailed out in the billions, arguably even in the trillions, for their gambling debts. That's what we're here against, and that's why we're taking a stand for freedom of speech, because they're going after the Emperor movement and anyone who stands against the imperialists, because they know we're a real threat that's rising. They know we authentically represent the American people. They know that the American people are ready for a change and ready for an end to the wars. And that's why they're cracking down on our First Amendment. They're cracking down on our Fourth Amendment. They're cracking down on all the civil liberties we know and love. So that's why we're here. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. Support the Uhuru movement. Thank you.
Just an excellent speech by Liam Space LaRouche. He really brought it home. It was really powerful stuff. Just really, really great. And many different speakers were up there from the People's Party. A guy named Theo who came all the way from Vermont. Erebus, their local organizer, was there. Irene from the Libertarian Party. Shout out to Io, who was there. Shout out to Melissa, who was there. I mean, it was just a great little speak out, a small speak out we did in Union Square. But then we then started marching, and we marched up to from there, we marched up to the UN for the interfaith peace rally that was called by religious friends.
Peace, not war. 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 Peace.
Yeah, it was really, really great. It was really, really tremendous. But we're gonna keep going here. So we did get to the UN. I'll start it when we get to the UN because that was pretty neat.
All right, we're here at the United Nations because we're deeply concerned about the danger of a new world war. The US is pouring weapons onto the island of Taiwan. The USA is pouring weapons into Ukraine, prolonging this ugly conflict that has taken some lives. We're here to say that Russians are not our enemies. Chinese are not our enemies. We are here to stand for peace. We say peace through economic development. Let's build some high-speed railway. Let's have jobs and healthcare and education. The road to peace is eradicating poverty. China is not our enemy. Russia is not our enemy. Cuba is not our enemy. Iran is not our enemy. Venezuela is not our enemy. It's time to stand for peace here at the United Nations. We are marching up to the religious rally. Russia and China are not our enemy. It's time to stand for peace. Peace, not war. 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 Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China.
That's the UN.
Peace with Russia. Peace with China. 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 Peace with Russia.
Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia.
Up. The coordinator in charge of Caribbean Affairs for the Universal Peace Federation. Let's welcome up Reverend Desmond Green.
Brothers and sisters, good afternoon to you. We're standing on top of the world today. We're in the United Nations. And we're here making a supplication to the citizens of this great state of New York.
Thank you.
How are you?
Because if you don't know how to create it, it'll never happen. First of all, I need to
letting people know about the they're facing criminal charges. It's a day of action.
And that has to do with our mind and body being united. But that unity between mind and body is our center. And that center should be the right God, created us in His image and His likeness.
Now we'd like to welcome up the pastor of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Pastor Vladimir Muzicka.
Now, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church,
let's welcome him up.
They're being persecuted. They are being persecuted right now in Ukraine by the Ukrainian government. They call them a Russian agent church. And their priests have been arrested. It's awful, the persecution they're facing. So the fact that they gave them a platform while they're being persecuted in Ukraine is a really big deal.
Greetings from Ukraine. Всі знають наш край і в якому зараз він в теперішньому стані.
Все понимают, it's very, it's very difficult. Everyone understands how difficult situation in the world right now.
Сьогодні хочу всіх вас привітати молитовно і промовити ті слова від Господа нашого Ісуса Христа. Мир вам!
I'd like to begin my greetings to everyone and say the words of the Jesus, peace upon you.
Мир всьому світові.
The peace to the whole world.
But anyway, we'll skip through it here. If you want to watch, eventually I spoke. If you want to watch my speech, go and watch it on the CPI YouTube channel. There's a whole video. I mean, this is an hour and a half, of content here. It was a long day, many, many great speeches. Irene spoke. Jamie from InfraWiki, he spoke. It was really, really great. We eventually joined their march that they did. Here, we'll show a little bit of that.
Where you want it now?
Peace. 25? Peace. Absolutely.
Yeah, the wind is kind of blowing. Sorry, the wind is blowing.
Yeah. It's true.
to the video.
Yeah. It was really a great day to bring our anti-imperialist message to this, general religious interfaith peace rally that they had at the United Nations. That was really, really great.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, good to see you. Yeah, we're gonna head out. This was great. This was how are you feeling, by the way? Not any better. Yeah, no, it's getting worse. I just keep talking.
Yeah. It was really, really, really great. It was a really, really great day. So there you go. So there you go. You can watch the entire video on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. You can watch it. So I'll drop the link in the chat one more time. I encourage you to go and watch it. See what CPI did with our day of action. People came from DC area, Virginia, Maryland. People came from Boston. Brian played beautiful music. Funky came from Pennsylvania, and it was great all around. It was just a great day in the streets. So if you want to watch the full video of everything that happened while we were out in the streets, by all means do that. So I just wanted to share that with all of you here tonight. I just thought that would be a good thing to do on the stream. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And I guess now we will do the roll call. We'll find out who is watching, who's on the other side of the camera, who is with us tonight. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Jonathan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Welcome, Jonathan. We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. Simon from Missouri is with us. Shout out to you, Simon Miller. Temple City, California. John McCarthy in Chicago. Shout out to you. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland, Ohio. Killian from Milwaukee is with us. Welcome, Killian in Milwaukee. Names and locations. I will call you all out. We got Clinton Fraser in London. We got James Turner in Portland, Oregon. St. David's, Bermuda. Liam in New Jersey. Shout out to Liam, by the way. Go subscribe to his channel. Great talk he just gave. Bob Troy in New York. Catalonia, Spain. Patch in Arizona. Sherry Cope May. Welcome, Sherry. Oh, Sherry in Cape May. Welcome, Sherry. Meredith and Quinn in Eatonville, Washington. Welcome, Meredith and Quinn. Shameton, Canada. Colin in Greensboro. Luca in Singapore. Welcome, Luca from Singapore. Welcome. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Jamie in St. Paul. Welcome, Jamie. We got Craig, a New Zealander living in Perth, Western Australia. Welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. Jamie in St. Paul, Minnesota. Welcome, folks. Welcome. I have 5 super chats to answer. However, if you want to direct the conversation in a certain way, by all means, send me another super chat and you will direct the conversation to go in another direction. That's what we're here to do. Oh, Dopa Money is in Toronto this evening. So welcome. Very, very important. Glad you're here, Dopamine. And anybody else, names and locations. As I said, more super chats are always appreciated. That will help you guide our conversation to go in the direction that you want it to go. So by all means, please send a super chat. Let's make this conversation go the way we want it to go. But on that note, folks, I guess I will start answering your super chat questions. The first super chat, Shoni is in Los Angeles. Welcome, Shoni. So the first super chat question we have is, were there existing contradictions that could have caused the USA to lose the Cold War? Well, here's the thing. I don't like historical hypotheticals because whenever you really start to think about them, right? People fall into this trap all the time. If only blank had happened, then this would have been this way. No, because blank happened for a reason. And there's an infinite number of reasons that led to blank happening. And then blank happening had an infinite number of other results. It's the butterfly effect, right? There's a famous short story about some people who go back in time, they get in a time machine and they kill a butterfly, and then they come back to the United States and it changes the election results. And that points to, and that's become known as the butterfly effect, that you cannot do historical hypotheticals. You can't, because for the USA to have lost the Cold War, so many other things would have had to be different. You can't just say, oh, if only one thing had been different. That one thing is tied up to so many other things. So many other things that you can't say that. So I urge people, and that people that want to get into, historical, demagogues and flim-flam men love to play this game. Leon Trotsky, one of the greatest demagogues and flim-flam men in history, his entire writing in exile is, if it was me, if I was in charge of the Soviet Union, we'd had a revolution in France a long time ago. I would have won the Spanish Civil War. Look, if only I was in charge of the Soviet Union, Germany, Hitler would have never come in there. I would have teamed up with the Social Democrats. I mean, if it was me, that's Trotskyism. The whole basis of Trotskyism. If only Trotsky had been in charge, Germany wouldn't have had the Nazis come to power. He would have won the Spanish Civil War. Blah, 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 blah. And you don't know that. That's all. And that's, Trotsky's bullshit. Trotsky's demagogy is largely based on that kind of, well, if only I was there, if that was me, if it was me, that's what it's based on, right? And so you want to stay away from that. But because you asked this question, I do feel that to some degree or other, I do owe you an answer more than just saying no historical hypotheticals, right? So I will just quickly go over the, the Cold War and the contradictions of U.S. society, because the Cold War really changed America. And I think we're still dealing with the consequences of the Cold War. So we all remember that at the beginning of the Cold War, we had McCarthyism. And I have divided, in my writing, I divide the Cold War into two periods. And, the two periods, one period kind of led into another, but 1968 is kind of a turning point. But at the beginning of the Cold War, we had McCarthyism. All right. The Roosevelt wing of the Democratic Party got purged. The McCarthyite witch hunts happened. The Communist Party's leaders were all thrown in federal prison. The Communist Party was forcibly broken up. The Chinese Revolution was victorious, and the rallying cry of McCarthyism became "Who lost China?" You had the Korean War, in which the United States bombed the Korean Peninsula, destroyed every building above 1 story tall on the Korean Peninsula, bombed dikes. I mean, we're talking 4 million people were killed in North Korea during the Korean War. The U.S. even threatened to drop atomic bombs. Douglas MacArthur threatened to drop atomic bombs on China and North Korea. It was a devastating war. Millions of people were killed. And during the early Cold War, it was very much, we're fighting the commies, we're fighting the Reds. It's America and Christianity and the West, the collective West, against the communists, against Marxism, Leninism, that is godless, that is atheistic, that wants to have a bloody revolution, that wants a totalitarian dictatorship in the name of building a communist revolution. That was the rhetoric of the United States, right? We remember Winston Churchill, an iron curtain has descended over Europe. That was the early Cold War. Millions of people died on the Korean Peninsula. The Greek Civil War, the United States was backing fascists and Nazis and others against communists in the Greek Civil War. Operation Gladio, the United States is meddling in the Italian elections to make sure the communists don't come to power, working with fascists. The USA is, all over the world. The USA is doing everything it can. Indonesia in 1965, they've elected a communist leader. And the communist leader. And so there's USA backs a coup where the military of Indonesia overthrows the government. It leads to 500,000 people being killed. It turns into kind of a genocide against ethnically Chinese people. 1965, 500,000 people killed in Indonesia. Just a horrendous crime against humanity. Many examples of this, right? The USA is propping up many authoritarian military Bonapartist regimes to crush the communists. This is the situation. This is the early Cold War. The early Cold War. However, things start to shift. One big event that I think is pivotal in kind of changing the tone of the Cold War is what they call Vatican II. And Vatican II, it was in the early 60s. The Vatican changed its position on a lot of things. The Catholic Church had a big shift. It's called Vatican II, right? It was a very pivotal moment. And part of what happened at Vatican II was the Catholic Church condemned the United States for bombing civilian areas. There was an official Catholic document that condemned the United States for the practice of bombing civilian areas. Now, they didn't specify where, right? And this was seen by some as a condemnation of the crimes of the United States in the Korean War, but it was also partly saying the United States was not exactly right in the Second World War. People think about Dresden, etc. So, people think about what was done to Tokyo during the Second World War. But there was a condemnation of the U.S. military tactic of mass bombing that was used during the Second World War and afterwards by the United States. And in the early 60s, you started to see the Catholic Church start to drift away from the United States. In the early 1950s, the Catholic Church was in an anti-communist frenzy. It was lined up with the United States against the communists. Early 60s, the Catholic Church starts to drift a little bit. The fear of nuclear war, etc. Right? The United States, the civil rights movement got going. And the civil rights movement got going largely because of the fact that, there were many stories of, diplomats from African countries who were serving at the United Nations, and they would go into a restaurant on the highway in New Jersey and they wouldn't be able to eat. They'd say, "You're black," and they'd kick them out of the restaurant. There's many examples of this, of diplomats from African countries. The USA is trying to tell countries all over Africa, don't align with the Soviet Union. Don't align with the Soviet Union. Don't align with the Reds and the communists. Align with us because we believe in freedom and democracy. And then diplomats from African countries come to serve at the United Nations. And then they go to, they get on the highway. They go down to New Jersey, to go sightseeing or whatever. And then they go into a restaurant and the restaurant owner says, "Get out of here. We don't allow black people in this restaurant." And that happened in New Jersey back in those days. Well, that was something that was hurting the United States. The Soviet Union took the image of Emmett Till and his mutilated body, sent it all over the world. And there started to be an understanding in American politics that Jim Crow segregation hurt the United States in the Cold War, and that domestically it gave the Communist Party a lot of support and sympathy in the black community. Malcolm X became kind of the leader of the black community. He became the leader of black nationalism. He was widely loved in Harlem, widely loved in Chicago, widely loved in Los Angeles and San Francisco for his black nationalist message. And he praised Mao, and he said that he liked Mao and that he admired the Soviet Union. He admired the colonized people of the world being in revolt. He considered black people to be an oppressed nation within U.S. borders. The Nation of Islam was really expanding and was, had oriented itself towards supporting the people around the colonized world, fighting for independence, aligning with the Soviet Union and China. And so you had the civil rights movement that began with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. leading the Montgomery bus boycott in the aftermath of the murder of Emmett Till. You had Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and you had the beginning of the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement was it caused a lot of controversy in the United States. It was largely supported in mainstream media in the North, but in the South, it was seen as an attack on, on the police, on the government, on white people in general. It was largely seen as a big problem by Southern white people and by the Southern establishment. It was supported mostly by the mainstream, media, but not completely, not entirely. Right. There were many people who thought that Martin Luther King was going too far, that he was too radical. These changes will come slowly. The far right wing accused Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of being a communist. But you started to see a shift in the American people, with largely the American people. It took a while. It wasn't overnight. Largely the American people began to sympathize with the civil rights movement. And that was a big shift from McCarthyism. In McCarthyism, it was don't protest anything, don't demonstrate anything, my country right or wrong. Well, the civil rights movement was largely saying black people have been given an unfair shake in the United States. They deserve their civil rights. The police, it's good for people to go and get themselves arrested to make a political statement. That was a shift in the American public consciousness. And we saw as McCarthyism was breaking, and this is very interesting, late 1950s, there was a surge of interest in communism and Marxism among young Americans. Many young Americans who were alienated by McCarthyism were becoming sympathetic. They wanted to hear what the Communist Party had to say. They wanted to hear what the Socialist Workers' Party had to say, what the Progressive Labor Party started to say. So we know that the CIA then launched the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, began funding leftists that would kind of steal the thunder. They didn't want dissidents in the United States to be dominated by communists. So they created, with CIA money, with the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, they created something called, that we like to call the synthetic left. They called it the New Left. Partisan Review magazine was widely distributed. Susan Sontag, Irving Kristol, Irving Howe, Mary McCarthy, others became the voice of this new left. It was critical of the military-industrial complex. It was critical of McCarthyism. It was critical of U.S. foreign policy, but it hated communists, and it was obsessed with cultural freedom. Right? Project MK Ultra comes in and starts pushing drug use everywhere. The Rockefeller think tanks promote the work of Alfred Kinsey, the Kinsey Report, that argues that homosexuality is much more common, that people have extramarital affairs much more frequently. So, the birth control pill is much more widely available, and the culture in the United States is shifting. Right. And then this all culminates, right, in 1968. You do have a mass episode of unrest in the United States. April of 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is murdered. He's killed. And in response to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., every major city in the United States goes up in flames. The black people are fighting and rebelling. The Black Panther Party is already in existence, becomes very popular among African Americans. You have Fred Hampton in Chicago. You have Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who started it in Oakland, California. You have, the rest of the Panther 21 in New York City, Eldridge Cleaver. I mean, it's a growing movement. In addition to that, Columbia University, shortly after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Columbia University is shut down by a massive student uprising led by Students for a Democratic Society. This communist activist group, a communist activist seize control of a number of buildings at Columbia University. The police are sent in to drag them out. It's weeks of violence and unrest on the college campus of Columbia University. Robert Kennedy's running for president. He gets murdered. He's seen as an anti-war candidate, and he gets murdered. We now have Robert Kennedy, who's come forward and said that his father was not killed by Sirhan. He was killed by the CIA. The bullets from Sirhan did not kill his father, right? Very interesting interview that YouTube will not allow, but you can watch it on Twitter, how Robert Kennedy says that. Then, you have the Democrat National Convention that happens in Chicago in August, I believe, of that year. And the Democrats nominate a pro-war candidate named Hubert Humphrey. Hubert Humphrey, is pro-Vietnam War, even though the majority of Democrats want to end the war. And so the activists, Progressive Labor Party, the Communist Party, other people are out in the streets protesting and getting clubbed and beaten up and arrested. And, there's a lot of violence in the streets outside the convention, inside the convention hall. They're trying to make it sound like everything's fine, but outside on the streets of the convention, there's blood and, people are getting arrested, people are being beaten up, and it's just chaos in the streets. You have the presidential election. Richard Nixon wins the election and becomes the president of the United States. Lyndon Johnson steps down. 1968 was a year of intense political turmoil in the United States. 1969, things continued to escalate, And so in that mass episode of unrest, the culture of the United States is changing. People are becoming less religious. People are becoming more socially liberal. The Black community is in a very radical revolutionary mode. They talk about the generation gap. U.S. culture is kind of for a change. And this is the turning point. This is where the United States shifts from the early Cold War of McCarthyism and Cold War conformity and militarism. That's when the United States shifts into the late Cold War. 1970, and I quote this book a lot. In my new book, I quote Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a very, very important book. Zbigniew Brzezinski is like the Dr. Evil of American imperialism. I mean, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was the Dr. Strangelove, if you want to call him that. He was the Cold War strategist. This is a guy from Poland who hated Russians, just hated Russians on an ethnic level, moved to Canada with his father, hated Russians, hated the communists, and ended up getting hired to run the Cold War University at Columbia University. And he's trying to figure out how to best defeat the Russians because he hates them on an ethnic level. Just a ruthless, evil dude, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski, and thank you, Alex, for the super chat. Thank you very much. Zbigniew Brzezinski writes this book called Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era, right? Or America's Role in the Technotronic Era. And this book, which, it's hard to get a copy of, it's not easy to get a copy of. This book is a really big deal. Because in this book, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's like an evil genius. He's evil. By far, he's extremely evil. Big pro-imperialist, big anti-communist. But in 1970, he comes out with this book, and he says, the hippies, the counterculture, the Black liberation movement, none of this is going to cause a communist revolution in America. This is just a result of change in culture caused by freedom of information. That with TV, with electronic communications, information is much more accessible. And so people are questioning authority much more than they used to. People are more open-minded. People's relationship with authority is changing. And this is because of changes in the culture that have been brought about by technology. And so Brzezinski says, rather than fight the Black liberation movement, rather than fight the college radicals and the hippies and the new left, why don't we utilize this change in the culture and the means of information creating unrest? Why don't we utilize that to bring down the Soviet Union? And he argues that computers and computer technology, information technology, the technotronic era, that the United States needs to position itself at the center of the computer revolution so they can use computer technology to foment unrest. And then he points out that the Soviet Union, what he calls institutional Marxism, has become rather rigid and dry because of the fact that they're, very authoritarian. They've been surrounded. They're under attack. And so the institutional Marxism doesn't have that revolutionary energy it used to have. Meanwhile, because we control the means of information, and if we sit at the center of the computer revolution, we can utilize that revolutionary aesthetic, that drive to rebel and tear things down. We can utilize that to bring down the Soviet Union. So you have a new reorientation of the American government where they shift, right? And especially with the Carter administration, the Trilateral Commission, that then gives birth to the Carter administration, Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, reorient U.S. foreign policy to no longer be, this authoritarian military fight the communist thing, to instead be about positioning the United States at the center of the computer revolution and utilizing control of information to foment unrest, to stage uprisings, to destabilize cultures and bring down the Soviet Union. And, as the 1970s goes on, you have the rise of the religious right. Conservatism in the United States is kind of reinvented, and you have the rise of what they call the Christian right, the evangelical Christian right, and the neoconservatives become kind of the Republicans, the Democrats, the kind of the loyal opposition. And you start to have what they call the late Cold War normal. And U.S. politics starts being defined with Republicans as being very military and being very Christian and conservative, Democrats being more open-minded and more critical of the United States on cultural issues. And the two groups, kind of complementing each other, a good cop, bad cop routine. The Democrats talk to the communist countries and want to negotiate more. The Republicans threaten the communist countries and escalate the arms race. But it's kind of a good cop, bad cop routine, all while the United States is positioning itself at the center of the computer revolution and trying to plant seeds of unrest and destabilization in the USSR. And eventually, that's how the United States was able to win the Cold War, is that the Soviet Union, it was surrounded, and it was, it was very, very, I don't know what you want to call it, very, very, very stuck in its ways. It was unable to evolve and change. And it developed a very rigid internal structure. And the Democrats and the liberals slipped their forces that were really into the cultural 1960s new left, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And, George Soros was funding art galleries for young artists. And the Gorbachev wing, the younger wing, the incoming leadership of the Soviet Communist Party, many of them were enamored with the new left. And they were convinced, Gorbachev really believed. He believed that Marxism-Leninism was outdated. He believed that the Soviet Union could transition to becoming a social democratic welfare state. He thought the USSR could move toward becoming Norway or Sweden. But in order to do that, he had to defeat the hardliner wing of the party that wasn't going to allow that. And so he made kind of an alliance with the, what you can call the new left, with the young people that were protesting, that loved, George Soros and loved American music. And the Gorbachev wing that, was kind of aligning itself with these young dissidents in the Soviet Union. They brought down the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was toppled. And the Soviet Union fell. And a lot of people that were involved in the protests against the Communist Party, that were supporting, that wanted Gorbachev to be released, that were supporting Boris Yeltsin, a lot of them got suckered. A lot of them got manipulated. They thought that Russia would be allowed to be a country. They thought NATO wouldn't move eastward. They thought that they'd be able to keep their guaranteed health care and their guaranteed jobs. They'd just become like kind of a welfare state. They would have a market economy, but they'd have, social programs. But what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union was the USA just destroyed the place. Economically, it was demolished. They mass unemployment, 30% unemployment. The farms all went out of business. American companies went in there and bought up factories and just closed them down. You had just mass suffering. The suicide rate went through the roof. I mean, it was just a devastating time, and that's why Gorbachev is widely hated throughout Russia, by communists, by nationalists, by others. Gorbachev is just, he's considered to be a traitor because he opened the floodgates to the 1990s, which was a devastating time in Russia's history, right? And they lost 10% of their population. People either died or just left the country, and millions of people just left. So it wasn't just death, but the suicide rate, the drug addiction. It was just a devastating moment. And that's the Cold War. So what do you take from that? The person who asked the question was asking, well, how is it, what one event could have been changed? It's like, there's too much there. There's too much there, right? The reason the USA was able to win the Cold War was that they positioned themselves at the center of the computer revolution, and they flipped, right? They flipped. They realized that the black question in the United States was a ticking time bomb. They realized that the younger generation, because of computer technology, was starting to question the militarism and the authority. So the U.S. government flipped its message. It went from a hard right kind of fascist message, authoritarianism, militarism, and it flipped to a synthetic left message as a way of kind of maintaining control. And it positioned itself at the center of a technological upsurge. And the Soviet Union, to their credit, right? People want to say, oh, well, that's because capitalism. Bill Gates was just tinkering around in his garage and he had an idea. That's how amazing capitalism is. Those Apple guys, they were just so smart. Bullshit. The Soviet Union in 1985, all by themselves, without any Western technology, they developed their own home computer system. Did you know this? They developed a home computer system. So that's just bullshit. The Soviet Union couldn't do it. They launched the first spacecraft. They patented the first mobile phone, 1957, Leonid Kaprianovich. They even developed their own home computer system. So the idea that a socialist system couldn't have computers, and they did it without anywhere the near of the technology. The reason the USA was at the center of the computer revolution was because the US government, not the private sector, the government made a strategic decision following orientation from Brzezinski to use the government, the state, not the free market, to pour lots of money into the computer technological breakthroughs, right? Apple was built by the CIA and the NSA. Google was built by the CIA and the NSA and the Department of Treasury. All the big Silicon Valley tech monopolies were started by the government, right? Now, they weren't directly started by the government, but Google, Amazon, right? Amazon was basically started by the Pentagon. Read about it. Amazon was basically started by the Pentagon, right? Jeff Bezos, read about the Department of Defense and Amazon, right? It wasn't that Jeff Bezos just had a good idea. And no, the government did it, right? And the same with Apple, the same with IBM. All of these companies had a huge amount of government loans that were given to them, government assistance that was given to them, government information and technological research that was given to them, right? And the USA, because it is the center of the global economy, because, it had been developing for 200 years, way longer than the former Soviet Union, it had way more resources to pour into government-funded research to get itself at the center of the computer revolution. And it worked. So if you combine all those factors and the fact that the Soviet Union had become very rigid, it needed to adjust its policies, but it couldn't, right? And you also combine the fact that the USA, with their new left, was able to kind of manipulate and confuse the younger generation of Soviet communists. It all created a situation where the USA was able to win the Cold War. But ultimately, the USA has won the Cold War, but all these things the USA used to win the Cold War are now hurting the United States. The internet, for example. The internet is tearing apart Western civilization. That's pretty clear. I'm not saying we should go backwards. It's just, it's tearing apart Western civilization. It's very, very clear. The problem of overproduction, artificial intelligence, eliminating jobs. But on top of that, the cultural confusion, there is no truth. Everything's a matter of opinion. Everyone's confused, right? Social media is destroying the minds of our young people, right? I'm going to write these super chats down. Carlos. Russia. Okay. And very much. Thank you. Thank you for the super chat. So there you go. That's important to keep in mind. So, when you ask me, is there one factor? There's many, many factors that led to all of that. But the very things that won the Cold War for the United States are now causing U.S. society to have a crisis, right? The crisis that we're facing in its root is economic, and it's rooted in a problem called overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And that's what my whole new book is about. The first chapter, go and listen to the audio book of it on Tyler's channel. Shout out to Tyler McConnell. He does great stuff. He's doing an audio book of this right now. The computer revolution, capitalism can't handle it. And I'm not the first person to have said this. Nelson Peary says it in his great book, The Future is Up to Us. Fred Goldstein said it in his book, Low Wage Capitalism, that the capitalist system in which the worker is only hired to make a profit for his boss It can't handle huge technological leaps. And whenever you have a huge technological leap in a capitalist economy, you have a long-term capitalist crisis. The Great Depression was caused by Henry Ford and the breakthroughs in assembly line production. And the computer revolution is child's play compared to what Henry Ford did, right? And, we're having a long-term economic crisis because there's no room for workers in the global assembly line. The worker cannot buy back what he produces. This is what Karl Marx talks about. The problem of poverty created by abundance. It is so easy for them to make products now. They can make iPhones and iPads. They got books that are going to be just churned out. You push a button and a book comes out of a machine, right? They used to have hundreds and thousands of people worked as in book binderies. They were, they don't have that anymore, right? Short order cooks, they don't have anymore, right? I mean, it's so many jobs have just been gotten rid of by the technological breakthrough. The jobs that do exist are increasingly de-skilled. You don't have to have any skilled, so the worker is much easier to replace. The living standard and the wages of average American workers have drastically decreased, but the ability of the capitalist to churn out products like never before has gone up. And as a result, the worker cannot buy back what he produces. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism. Read all about it in my new book, The Tendency of the Falling Rate of Profit, The Problem of Overproduction, and a huge technological leap like artificial intelligence, like the computer revolution, has spawned a long-term capitalist crisis. Meanwhile, they don't have this problem in China. China, if there's a problem in the economy, the government just steps in and says, tells corporations, you do this. They have a 5-year economic plan. China's continued to have growth, right? Because the laws of the market don't apply in China. In China, the Communist Party is in charge, not the market, right? Under capitalism, you have the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. Well, in a socialist society where the banks and the factories and the major industries are controlled by the state and controlled by all of society, a state that represents all of society, 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party, when society controls the means of production, you can just continue to have growth, right? And China has been able to just keep moving ahead despite the computer revolution, right? China just keeps its economy moving ahead because every time their economy starts to have a downturn, the government just steps in and says, nope, we don't allow it. And they tell the banks what to do. I mean, I've written about how in 2015, the Chinese stock market had a meltdown, and then the next week it was right back up because the Communist Party made some phone calls and they said, if you short sell, we'll arrest you. They froze the selling of stocks by state-run industries. And then their stock market was right back up because the stock market doesn't have the power. The Communist Party does. They have state central planning. They have socialism, right? And socialism is ultimately the only way the United States can get out of the crisis it's in. It needs a society where the banks, factories, and industries, the centers of economic power are rationally organized to control society, are rationally organized for the benefit of society to make sure that growth is unlimited. That's the point. All right. So the next super chat, can you explain what the banner with the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations meant? Well, here's the thing. I looking back on it, I realized that wasn't the most strategic banner. We wanted to have a banner with a Bible verse on it because we were going to an interfaith rally where there were clergymen speaking, priests and rabbis and others, and we thought it would be better to have a religious banner. If we could do it again, I'm always willing to have self-criticism. If we could do it again, we would probably have a banner that just said peace with Russia and China, because I think a lot of people saw us marching with that banner and had no idea what we were about. Now, we did have those great signs. Absolutely shout out to Kieran from New Jersey. He made these beautiful signs, hands off Uhuru, and hands, and no World War III. But if we could do it again, we would make a big banner that said, peace with Russia and China, so people knew what we were talking about. Because I think people saw that, that religious banner. It was an attempt, that's from the Book of Revelations. It's about God's kingdom coming on earth, and the leaves of the tree shall be for the healing of nations. There shall be no more curse. Revelations 22:2. It's a beautiful verse, but you're right. I get what you're saying. It didn't really communicate the message very well. We were trying to go to an interfaith rally. We were trying to express our message in a way that could relate to people at this more religion-oriented rally. But you're right. I think something was missing. If we could do it again, we would communicate a little bit differently. So there you go. Very good point. Next question. If anyone has any more super chats, throw them my way. In a recent interview, RFK referenced Huey Long as a demagogue. What is your view of Huey Long? I have a very positive view of Huey Long. The reason that RFK referenced Huey Long as a demagogue is because that's the way he's generally referenced, right? There's a movie, All the King's Men, that portrays Huey Long as a guy who started out good and turned bad. They called him the dictator of Louisiana because he was not friendly with the Communist Party. He was often called a fascist by leftists. However, he was widely considered to be a communist in Louisiana, and he was considered to be a friend of the black people in Louisiana. His career began by fighting the Ku Klux Klan. Louisiana is a southern state, but it has a very high percentage of Roman Catholics. And the Democratic Party in Louisiana was divided between the Ku Klux Klan and the anti-Ku Klux Klan. And Huey Long, he emerged as a Protestant who would stand with the Catholics against the Ku Klux Klan. And he empowered black people in his state. He increased voting among African Americans. He had African American ministers that were leaders of his Share Our Wealth movement. It was still the South. It was still Jim Crow, but he was, at the time, that he was killed, there was like an attempted coup against him by the state militia in Louisiana. And he was basically accused of being a friend of the black people. They called him an N-word lover. He was considered pro-black. And in fact, Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, is named after Huey Long. His parents were living in Louisiana. And if you read Revolutionary Suicide by Huey Newton, it opens by talking about how Huey Newton's father loved Huey Long so much because Huey Long enabled black women to become nurses, right? Huey Long changed the law so that black women could become nurses in the state of Louisiana. And that Huey Long basically made an appeal to racism in order to do it. And he said, what about, our insane asylums? Do we want, black inmates to be handled by white nurses? No, we should have black women who became nurses. But that improved the lives of millions or thousands of black women in the state of Louisiana, that they could become nurses and get wages as nurses. And that Huey Newton's parents loved Huey Long. And Huey Long in Louisiana is really widely loved. Huey Long is considered to be, he's like one of the founding fathers. I mean, he's just a beloved figure. And he paved the roads of Louisiana. He brought school textbooks. They didn't have school textbooks in most of Louisiana until Huey Long came along, right? He helped farmers, and they tried to impeach him on numerous occasions. And the poor people would then pile into the Capitol and block his impeachment. It was amazing what Huey Long was able to do. I mean, Huey Long was a populist, and I think very highly of Huey Long. Huey Long, he was against the main way that he built up state power in Louisiana was Louisiana has a lot of oil, and that oil was run by Standard Oil, which is the Rockefellers. And so Huey Long started taxing the shit out of Standard Oil. And he built kind of a coalition, an anti-monopoly coalition of all the capitalists of Louisiana and the working class and others and the farmers against Standard Oil. And he just kicked the ass of Standard Oil. Everyone hated Standard Oil. And then he taxed Standard Oil and started using the money to then subsidize businesses. And if you look at it, towards the end of Huey Long's, leadership of Louisiana, they had almost a state-run economy. Basically so many people were employed by the government in Louisiana, by the state. The state was subsidizing so many businesses. They had more or less a planned economy. It was moving toward, it was beyond Bonapartism. I mean, it was like a popular, it was like a farmer working class anti-monopoly coalition was running the state, and they didn't really have a free market. With all the oil money that Huey Long had built up into the state treasury, he had basically set up a situation where he was kind of planning the economy of the state. But then Rockefeller was aligned with Roosevelt, right? Roosevelt's main enemy was the National Association of Manufacturers, the industrialists, right? And they hated the labor unions, and they hated Roosevelt. Roosevelt was aligned with the Rockefellers, the oil bankers, right? So Huey Long, his whole career was about kicking the ass and fighting against the the Standard Oil Company, and Louisiana is largely a rural state. Back then, there was very little industry in Louisiana. There weren't many factories. There was no labor movement to speak of. So Huey Long, he started looking like he was going to run for president against Roosevelt, and he would have had the backing of the factory owners, and he would have been fighting the Rockefellers. And that's when he was killed. So he was on the wrong side. There was a division in the ruling class. The Communist Party and Roosevelt were on one side, and Huey Long and the National Association of Manufacturers were on the other. But Huey Long, I believe, was a socialist. And if you look at what he did, he was a friend of black people. He was a friend of socialists. But he, his base was small farmers. His base was not the industrial proletariat. It wasn't factory workers. It was small farmers. The supporters of Huey Long were very poor, low-income sharecroppers and farmers. That's who he was aligned with, and they are quote-unquote petty bourgeois. So you could argue that he was like a Jacobin. He was like a peasant Jacobin. He was a rural peasant revolutionary, about the closest thing that we could have in America to something like that. And he ended up, he was not a friend of the Communist Party. It's complicated, but he fought for the working people of Louisiana, most of whom were farmers, but he fought for them. And actually, I've shown this on streams before, but since you asked for it, and, I've only got a few more super chats here, I compiled a clip, and this is actual footage of Huey Long mixed in with John Goodman performing speeches by Huey Long. So everything you're seeing is things Huey Long actually said. Some of this is actually footage of Huey Long, the black and white stuff. The other stuff from John Goodman, these are all the actual quotes. These are all actual quotations from Huey Long. So even if it's not Huey Long actually saying it, these are words he actually used. You'll see, you can't listen to this man and think he's not a leftist. He was a leftist, right? And to be sympathetic to the black people, to be opposed to the Klan in the South at that time, Huey Long was on the right side of history. There was a division in the ruling class. He was on the wrong side of it. Okay. And that's how these things go, right? I mean, alliances and, these things are important, but I'm just telling you that Huey Long was a progressive figure. So here we go. This is actual footage of Huey Long plus clips of John Goodman playing Huey Long in a movie.
According to the tables which we have assembled, it is our estimate that 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth of America, and that over 70% of the people of America don't own enough to pay the debts that they owe. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what's intended for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll ever be able to feed the balance of the people is to make that man come back and bring back some of that grub he ain't got no business with.
Under this oak, where one of our forebears, Evangeline, waited for her lover, Gabriel, who never came. This oak is an immortal spot. The entire world knows about this oak from the poem of Longfellow. But Evangeline is not the only one who has waited here in disappointment. No, no. Where are the schools that you have waited for your children to have but never come? Where are the roads and highways that you have sent your money to build but are no closer now than ever before? Evangeline wept bitter tears, but that only lasted one lifetime. Your tears in this land and around this oak have lasted for generations. Will you let me dry the tears of those who still weep?
How are you going to feed the balance of the people? What's Morgan and Baruch and Rockefeller and Mellon going to do with all that grub? They can't eat it. They can't wear the clothes. They can't live in the houses. Give them a yacht. Give them a palace. Send them to Reno and give them a new wife when they want it. If that's what they want. But when they've got everything on the God's living earth that they can eat and they can wear and they can live in, and all that their children can live in and wear and eat and all their children's children can use, then we got to call Mr. Morgan and Mr. Mellon and Mr. Rockefeller back and say, come back here. Put that stuff back on this table here that you took away from here, that you don't need. Leave something else for the American people to consume. And that's the program. We're not going to destroy the Gulf Refining Company. We're not going to destroy the Standard Oil Company. But we're going to say that the limit of any one man's stock ownership in the Standard Oil Company is from $3 to $5 million to that individual, and that the balance of the people of America own the balance of what the Standard Oil Company is worth. All right.
My name is Huey Long, Jr. Like any good patriot, I was born in a log cabin. I would get up before the sun to help my daddy, and my sympathy has always gone to those who toil, and I have endeavored to help them. They say I'm the Karl Marx of the hillbillies. I'm no Karl Marx, but I do love the working man. Now you get that, type it up, and bring it in here when you do.
There'll be people out there, there'll be neighbor or friend, turn out their masses of America, 75 to 80 to 85% of the people not only give up their property year after year, but they go further and further and further into economic slavery to where the flesh and blood of the born and the unborn will never be able to raise the debt, let alone come back and rescue the property that they've lost from these depressions.
You know how for most of you, your pocketbooks are empty, your bellies are tight? They tell us we are even faced with communism. Why not? When 1% of the people control wealth. I'm not a communist. I would not take a single luxury away. But when we reach a point where some men have so many millions that another 100 or so means nothing to them, we are going to have to siphon off some of the water for our own little pool. That's God's law. Look it up in Leviticus. Well, we are going to restrict the piling up of wealth in the hands of the few, and we are going to give it to the people. Now, this is the chance for you to make your voices heard in Washington. We have created an organization called Share Our Wealth Society, and we have prepared a pamphlet for it, and we can send it to you for free. And the whole plan is set forth in it. So I'm appealing to you to organize a Share Our Wealth Society in your own community tonight or tomorrow, and help me, as your servant, see that the government of this country is returned to the people.
And now, the corporate element of this state that were cheek for Joel, hand in hand with them, who profited by it, who ransacked this state for the element of their allies, are being told what they can do and what they can't do, what they will pay, what they can't keep from paying for the welfare of the people of Louisiana, and we expect to have this state ruled by the people and not by the lords and the interest of high finance.
Will the distinguished senator from wherever the hell he's from please yield the floor for one moment?
I will reluctantly yield the floor to the junior senator from Louisiana.
Thank you. Now, when I first came here to Washington 6 months ago, I felt that we were on a mission to save this country from the despair which is gripping it. but all I get is a good deal of dither and blather from both parties. Millions and millions of workers are out of work. Millions of farmers are losing their farms to the banks, and what are the banks going to do with them? Now, you listen to me. Stop fooling around. Break up the concentration of wealth in this country and redistribute it according to the Lord's plan. Or if you do not, listen. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. Weep and howl.
Senator, what are you trying to do? Start a revolution?
No, sir, I'm trying to wake you all up.
Sir, you are not speaking for us.
Well, if I'm not speaking for y'all, I guess I'm speaking against you. The economy of this country is collapsing, and unless we do something about it, the people will be at those Capitol doors 6 months from now looking to string you scoundrels up. And unless you awaken, I'll be there tying the noose.
Then we start from the bottom, that the 25 or more million American families shall have a homestead, a home, and the comforts of a home, including an automobile and a radio, the things it takes in that house to live on. We say to America, 125 million, none shall be too big, none shall be too poor, none shall work too much, none shall be idle. No luxurious mansions empty, none walking the streets, none impoverished, none in pestilence, none in want, but in the land blessed by the smile of the Creator, with everything to be consumed, to be eaten, to be worn, that America will become a land sharing the fruits of the land, not for the favored few, not to satisfy greed, but that all may live in a land in which the Lord has provided an abundance sufficient for the luxury and convenience of the people in general, I think.
That's Huey Long. And that, again, the way he's remembered is generally pretty negative because, I think I'll quote the movie Braveheart by saying that history is written by those who've hanged heroes, right? He was an anti-imperialist internationally. He opposed U.S. military interventions in South America. From the floor of Congress, he ranted about how the U.S. military shouldn't be used to help strengthen oil companies and fight for their profits. Just a great guy in a lot of ways. Next super chat question. Someone read that in the USA there was harmony and intimate relations between the Socialist Party and the Christian Socialist movement? ? I mean, the Socialist Party of America, we're talking before the First World War, before the Russian Revolution, the Socialist Party of America was a huge, vast coalition. There were many different forces involved. You had Marxists, you had religious socialists, you had utopians, you had anarchists. It was a very broad coalition. Reverend Norman Thomas kind of became the face of the Socialist Party after the death of Eugene Debs. And Norman Thomas was not good in a lot of ways. He was an anti-communist. He was, he called himself a pacifist, but he was very much in favor of U.S. foreign policy on many different occasions. But Norman Thomas was a minister. I believe he was an Episcopal minister, and he was kind of the face of American socialism. He ran for president on the Socialist Party ticket many times. Norman Thomas was involved in the civil rights movement. He was an anti-communist social democrat. That was Norman Thomas. There's a whole history of this. Many of the early settlers of the United States set up utopian socialist communes, near the area where I grew up in Ohio, in Akron, Ohio, in what's now called Akron, Ohio. There was a city called Zor, Zoar, and it was a utopian socialist commune. There was New Harmony in Indiana. There were many utopian socialist communities, many of the early settlers. Many people look at Utah before it was part of the United States, right? When the Mormons went out there before it was a state, and basically, I forget what did they call it, New Zion or something. It was basically a state-run economy. It was like the government had the only bank that had a monopoly on credit, and the Mormon Church was basically, they had a socialist state out there. It was a theocratic socialist state, but if you look at how quote unquote New Zion was set up, was that what it was called? Whatever the state that was led by Brigham Young, whatever they called it. It was not capitalist. It was very much a state-run economy. There was a market sector, but the state, pretty much controlled everything. There were social services to make sure no one was hungry, etc. Government control of banking. The church could at any point step in and tell every business what to do. That was, before the federal troops showed up in Utah, they were kind of running some kind of, Christian socialist community out there. There's a lot of that in the United States, right? Historically. Now things obviously changed first with the Russian Revolution. You had the crushing of the American Socialist Party. When it reemerged, it was very weak, and it was also very anti-communist. You had the Communist Party, you had the Cold War and anti-communism. So all of this has gotten shifted and changed around. And the way Americans think about all this stuff is very, very confused. I told you all how I went out to West Virginia after Trump got elected. 2017, a steel worker told me he voted for Trump because the Democrats don't care about the working man anymore. Now they're just a bunch of socialists. That's how it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? And you look at the synthetic left, you look at the woke people, they're not socialists, right? They're not socialists in any conceivable way. So, it's complicated. All of this is very, 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 very complicated. And yeah, the American mind is very muzzled and confused on all of this. But right now, what we need economic development. We need to break out of the global financial system. We need to team up with Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela and Cuba. We need the banks and the factories and the industries to be organized to serve public good and not profits. We need to mobilize the public to rebuild this country. We need to defeat the big bankers and the big monopolists that have taken their grip on power. We need to defeat the military-industrial complex. So I don't know what you want to call it, right? This sounds like socialism and communism to me, but if you want to call it Americanism or rebirth, you want to call it libertarianism, you want to call it whatever you want to call it, but we have to defeat the big monopolists who control this country. We have to rebuild this country. We have to team up with Russia and China. We have to have a mass mobilization for economic growth and construction. We need infrastructure, so whatever you want to call it libertarianism, call it communism, whatever you want to call it. We've got to defeat the international bourgeoisie. We've got to defeat the ultra monopolists. We've got to build an anti-monopoly coalition. We've got to stop the danger of a new world war. We've got to stop the emerging police state. And that's where it's at. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but that's what we need to do. All right. Tomorrow is the 60th anniversary of Kennedy's peace speech. Well, maybe we'll show it on this stream tomorrow. That's a good idea, right? Kennedy's peace speech that many people feel he was assassinated for. I know the LaRouche movement, Schiller Institute is doing a lot to commemorate it. So maybe we'll show it on this stream tomorrow. If I can find good video of it, which I think I can do. Maybe we'll show it. So there you go. Are you a fan of any of the Back to the Future movies? Well, there's 3 of them, if I remember correctly. The first one is about the guy who goes back from the 80s to the 1950s. That one I actually enjoyed. That's a good movie. It's Michael J. Fox, I believe, is the hero. It's when he's young. And then they've got the mad scientist doctor who's also a famous actor who's in a lot of movies. Can't remember his name. And he goes back in time to the 1950s, and kind of changes his father's life, fights, convinces his father to fight the bully, something like that. It's a fun movie. It's commenting on something that in the 1980s, there was a huge amount of nostalgia for the 1950s. A big part of the so-called Reagan Revolution was a feeling that, you'd had the 60s cultural revolution, but then in the 1970s, you had some serious economic downturns. So Ronald Reagan, he was very much saying, I'm going to bring the 1950s back. I'm going to bring back people being patriotic and loyal to the country. I'm going to bring back people being socially conservative and not using drugs and not having sex outside of marriage and not, whatever. And I'm also going to bring back, loving America, and I'm going to bring back the strong economy. So Reagan was very much appealing to people's nostalgia for the 50s. That movie has someone from the 80s going back to the 50s. That's very much part of the time period. Also, the 80s, the late 70s and the 80s, that's when you suddenly got the myth of the 1950s. It's really interesting because my whole childhood, my whole life, everyone talked about how, back in the 1950s, America was good. If you think about it, right? It's like America stopped being America in the 1960s with the protests, with the counter, the Cultural Revolution, and the 1950s was when America was still America. Like that's kind of the message you get. That's wrong in many, many ways because the 50s was only one decade. It was only one decade, right? And that, before the 1950s, what did you have? You had World War II and then the Great Depression where people were starving on the streets, right? And the 1950s was a booming U.S. economy because of the reason that it was a booming U.S. economy was because of the fact that every major country in the Western world, every major city in the Western world had been destroyed. The United States had huge industries. It had steel industry, car industry. The rest of the world had been destroyed by a war. So the rest of the world had to buy its products from the United States. And the USA had a huge industrial base. Roosevelt had paved the roads and bridges and highways and laid the infrastructure out. And so the USA had a huge economic boom. The whole world had a huge economic boom. The post-World War II economic expansion is the greatest episode of mass growth in human history. The Soviet Union was rapidly industrializing. China was starting to industrialize. Many countries, Egypt got electrification because of the Soviet Union in the 1960s. The Soviet Union built a power plant in Egypt. The Soviet Union was building infrastructure in Africa and in India. The Soviet Union was building steel mills. And it was a huge episode of economic expansion, right, in the United States and in the world, right? But the United States, because it had not been destroyed in the Second World War, it was at the center of this economic expansion. And so people were buying all their steel from the United States. People were buying their cars from the United States. The U.S. economy rapidly expanded during the 1950s. But the way I was taught about this, I was a kid in the 90s, and people had it in their heads that like the 50s was what America had always been. Like from the time of the American Revolution up until the 60s, America was leave it to Beaver. Everyone was happy. And then, and then the 60s ruined everything. And it's like, no, the 1950s was an economic boom. It was an economic boom, but it only happened because the rest of the world had been blown up, because the Great Depression had been resolved. The great crisis of overproduction that had led to the Great Depression had been resolved by mass destruction of the world and a horrendous war and the Holocaust and horrendous events, right? Also, the 1950s was not a good time for Black folks. They were living under Jim Crow segregation, right? It was not a good time for a lot of people in the United States. And the American psyche, even as the economy was doing well, there was something wrong in people's minds. That's when the UFO thing started. 1947 is when the phrase flying saucer enters the U.S. consciousness. And the U.S. economy is doing well, but the population is traumatized by the horror of war. And they're traumatized by this new invention called the TV that's telling them the Soviets are going to come kill them. So Americans are starting to hallucinate flying saucers everywhere. They're seeing space aliens coming for them, right? And that's a weird thing. It's like all of a sudden, World War II is over and the U.S. public is, they're like, well, it can't be this good. What does this mean? It's awful, right? And, Jim Crow segregation. The other thing that's interesting about the 1950s, and a lot of people don't realize this, and this is really important, right? The narrative that I always got from conservatives, everything, we were good conservatives in the 1950s and there was no, blah, blah, blah. There was none of that. But the 1930s was much more sexually promiscuous than the 50s. The 1950s was a cultural regression, right? They passed a law that no gay people could work at the U.S. State Department. There was a huge crackdown on pornography and stuff. But in the 1930s, there had been a wave of sexual liberalism in the 1920s and 30s. And people don't remember that the 1950s was more like they were going back to pre-World War I, right? There had been a huge, in the 1920s and 30s, for example, Freudianism was very widespread. There was a movie that came out in Hollywood. There's a Hollywood movie. I kid you not. Right? Look this up. It's called The Cat People, right? 1942, during World War II, they made a movie called The Cat People. And it's a movie about a woman who every time she gets sexually aroused, she turns into a cat. And it's not clear if she actually turns into a cat or if she just is hallucinating. She's mentally ill, right? And it's clearly a Freudian piece about the dangers of sexual repression, right? This is a Hollywood movie that was like shown, basically showing a woman who is sexually repressed. Every time she gets turned on, she's so disgusted with herself, she turns into a cat. Right? It's clearly, this is a film promoting, it's a Freudian film in opposition to sexual repression. The 1950s, that film would have been illegal. It would have been outlawed. But in 1942, during World War II, they thought, man, what the heck? Why not? Right? There's been nostalgia for the 50s since Greece at the end of the 70s. Exactly. Joe, you're exactly right. That's what I'm telling you. Part of setting the stage for Reagan was you had that Grease movie, right? The Warren Casey musical Grease came out much earlier. That was a Broadway thing, and it was a little bit different. But the movie Grease, the Hollywood movie Grease, was very much about setting the stage for the Reagan Revolution, right? Remember the good old days of the 1950s. And, it was just about setting, this idea that the 50s, that's what America has always been. America has always been white picket fence, leave it to Beaver. And it all got ruined by the hippies and the civil rights marchers. That's a very 1980s narrative. That's the narrative that a lot of the religious right pushed. James Dobson pushed that. What's his name? Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, who just died. That was largely their message. Don't you remember how good things were back in the 1950s? Well, that's what America always was. America's always been a Christian nation. And in the 1960s and 70s, we screwed up everything. Let's go back to the 1950s. It's a weird right-wing fantasy. The 1950s was one decade, and the 1940s was World War II. The 1930s was a Great Depression. The U.S. history, it's weird. It's like, U.S. history just froze in the 50s until the hippies ruined everything. That's a big part of the neocon Reagan propaganda aesthetic. And that's that movie, Back to the Future. It's very much that. It's nostalgia for the 50s. That's what it is. Now, the question was, the question that I was asked was, what about, so any of the Back to the Future movies? The first one I've seen, it's a pretty well-made movie. It's a classic. It's a good movie. It's before my time, but I saw it. It's a good movie. A lot of what they did, it's just very well made. The clocks at the beginning and all of that, it's brilliant, right? The second Back to the Future, I hate it. I can't stand it. Like it just doesn't hold my attention. They're going here, they're going to the future, they're going back in time, blah, 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 blah. And I've never seen the third one. The third one, they go to the cowboy, they go to the Wild West or something. I've never seen the third one. I'd like to see the third one, right? I get the feeling that might be good, but I've only seen the first and second, and the first one I liked. It was a well-made film. The second one I didn't like. So there you go. There you go. And then this person says, Carlos Menem was the Boris Yeltsin of Argentina. In the 90s, Latin America and Korea was worse than Russia. Well, I can't speak to Korea. I don't know enough about Korean politics in the 90s. North Korea really suffered, because they call the Arduous March, where they were economically cut off. But what about South Korea's politics in the 1990s? I don't know much about. I know Park Chung-hee was killed in 79. And, the military dictatorship ultimately fell in like the 80s, like mid 80s or something. And I don't really know much about South Korean politics in the 90s. Latin America, it was a wave of austerity in the 1990s. I witnessed that up close. That's one of the reasons I'm a communist today. Is I went with my dad, who leads nature tours, nature tours in the Galapagos Islands. I went with him to Ecuador in 1999, and I saw mass poverty like I had never seen before. And I was in the middle of a man-made famine. There were hundreds of thousands of malnutrition-related deaths in 1999 in Ecuador. And I was there in Ecuador in the middle of a famine. And I saw, I was a wealthy American staying at fancy hotels. I wasn't suffering, but I saw all these desperately poor, starving people in Ecuador. you know, and like that was like, wow, I didn't realize how bad things were. And then I went back to Ecuador in 2013 after they'd had President Correa, that'd been moving towards socialism, aligning with China and the Bolivarian countries. I saw a completely different country, right? But yeah, I mean, the 90s in Latin America, that's when they, the rain became private property in Bolivia. They privatized it. The water fights in Bolivia that gave rise to Evo Morales and the miners' strikes, the Caracazo in Venezuela. Austerity was just devastating. So here's the link to the speech, John F. Kennedy's peace speech. Maybe we'll show it on our stream here tomorrow. Thank you, John, for providing that link. We do appreciate it. We absolutely do appreciate it. We absolutely appreciate it. Fiorella's interview with Tara Reid was beautiful. It absolutely was. And I admire Tara Reid. Every opportunity I have to talk with her is an opportunity. It's really an honor that she's came and spoke at CPI conferences. And they bait her for it. They say, "Oh, you went to the CPI event." Yep. So there you go. There you go. There you go. All right. And are the Amish considered socialists? I grew up around a lot of Amish people in a part of Ohio where we would see Amish people go by in their horse and buggies out front of the house. We would drive by Amish people. They'd be selling fruit on the side of the road and stuff. And I would say, no, I don't think the Amish are socialist in any conceivable way. They practice capitalism. They just don't believe in technology. Right. There's a lot of Amish people who own stores. There are homeless Amish people. There's nothing socialist about the Amish. There's not, right? They vote, they pay taxes. They're part of American society. They keep to themselves and they don't use technology. But they have businesses. They're just, I don't know. There's things about the Amish that people don't realize. I don't know. I don't know what, what do you want to know? I grew up in an area, where there were a lot of Amish people, right? In Pennsylvania and in Ohio, and the part of Ohio I was in, Northeast Ohio, you have a lot of Amish communities. What do you want to know about the Amish? They look like Orthodox Jews because in the Bible somewhere in the Old Testament, it says that you can have a beard, but you can't have a mustache. So they have a huge beard, but they shave above their lip. So, and Orthodox Jews do the same thing, probably because of the same Old Testament Bible verse. So they have the big beard, but they have no mustache. That's one thing about the Amish. Another thing about the Amish. What about the Amish? So the kids grow up as Amish, right? And then when they get to be a certain age, they don't have to, they get to go out and have fun before they join the church. Right? They join the church when they're a young adult. So they have this like period in their late teens and early 20s where they're allowed to they go out and they drink alcohol and they party and they do all kinds of stuff. They go have their fun before they join the church. That's part of their tradition. A lot of people don't realize that. They have, and then they talk about it for the rest of their lives. It's a little bit weird, right? If you think that drinking alcohol and dancing and, driving in cars is a big sinful thing, you wouldn't have the attitude that like, well, once you're 18 to 21, you get to go out and do it. And then you don't do it ever again, but you talk about it for the rest of your life. It's a little strange, right? I don't know. It's weird how these things work, right? It's very weird how these things work. People, I don't know. But yeah, the Amish, they all remember that period in their lives where they got to go out and be wild before they joined the church. The big thing that the Amish are famous for is if you don't join the church, your family will never speak to you again. Right. So, if you ultimately make the decision not to be Amish, they shun you. They will not speak to you. They call it shunning, and they will not speak to you. And that's where shunning comes from. Interestingly, that's where it comes from. The term shunning, it's an Amish Pennsylvania Deutsch word that means you don't speak to somebody. And if if your parents and all that, once you turn 18 and all that, if you choose not to become Amish, they don't speak to you. Another weird thing about the Amish is they call non-Amish people English, which is interesting because we speak English, right? They refer to the non-Amish people as the English, which is very interesting. Most of the Amish people that I encountered spoke English. Some of them had trouble with their English, but they spoke it to some degree or other. The Pennsylvania Dutch stuff, I think that's more in Pennsylvania. The Amish that I would see, I mean, maybe among themselves they speak the Pennsylvania Dutch language, but for the most part, I mean, the Amish that I encountered could speak English. Some of them had a little bit of a an accent, like they in their household they spoke a little bit of Pennsylvania Dutch, but when I would encounter Amish people, that's how they were. What else about Amish people? There were hate crimes. There were some Amish people who got arrested. There was a big incident in Ohio. It was big news. One group of Amish people were fighting with another group of Amish people. So the men from the one group of Amish people, they went. I'm trying to say this without laughing. You shouldn't laugh at this. This is actually serious, but I don't know. Part of me, it's not our culture. So, part of you want to laugh, but you shouldn't laugh at these things. But so the one group of Amish men was mad at this other group of Amish men, thought they were, they had a theological disagreement, thought they were, infidels and not true believers or whatever. So they went and tied these Amish men down and cut their beards off. They tied them down and they shaved their beards. And that was prosecuted as a federal religious hate crime, actually. And the Amish guys who tied down the other Amish guys and cut their beards off went to prison for a long time. There you go. And that's a pretty nasty thing to do. If someone came into your house and tied you down against your will, cut your hair, that would be a hate crime, right? Maybe they didn't cut their flesh, but they held them. It's false imprisonment. You tie somebody down and cut their hair off. So yeah, it was a hate crime. It was a religious hate crime. It got prosecuted in federal court in Ohio. I remember that. Another thing that happened, I remember this, after 9/11, this was something that I got a kick out of. There was a local news story that was, a local radio station was interviewing the Amish about their opinion of 9/11. And I remember listening to this. I was driving. I was in the car with my mother. We were driving somewhere and we're listening to this local radio station interviewing Amish people about 9/11. It was a couple weeks after 9/11 happened. They stopped an Amish guy in his horse and buggy. They asked him, what do you think about 9/11? And he said, I heard there was an airplane crash. There was a big plane crash. And that kind of shows you, if you don't have TV, you don't have radio, you don't read the newspapers, that was what he said. He said, I heard there was like a big plane crash. He wasn't wrong. There was 2 big plane crashes actually, but there's a little bit more to it than that. But, he heard there was a big plane crash. I'm gonna think about it, right? It's like, that's Ezekiel was driving down the road and he saw this, this guy with this funny recording device ask him, so what did you hear about 9/11? And he said he heard there was a big plane crash. Another thing, this is a common thing, right? So, right, Amish people don't like to be photographed, right? They don't like being photographed. They think it's, they don't believe in technology. So if you photograph them, you're doing that. They also don't believe that, the 10 Commandments in the Bible, it says, thou shalt make no graven images. The Amish don't play cards because of that, because cards have a human face on them. And the dolls, the Amish kids have dolls, but the dolls have no face on them. They are against faces. They don't believe in statues. They don't believe in playing cards. And so if you take a picture of them, you've made a graven image of them. They think it's a sin. Okay. But many people, I heard my whole life, the Amish think that if you take their picture, you took their soul. No, they don't. No, they don't. And that's, and that is something, that's a racist myth about like African people, right? Like old movies, right? In old movies, the white person in the white, safari hat goes into the village and tries to take a picture of the indigenous African tribe or whatever. And she says, don't take their picture. They'll think you stole their soul. African indigenous tribes don't think that, right? That's just something that racist Hollywood people made up about black people in Africa, right? Black people in Africa don't believe that, you know, if you take a picture of them, it takes your soul. Okay. They just don't believe that. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe some tribe somewhere in Africa believes that. For the most part, they don't. Okay. That's just something made up. It's in racist white people movies. And somebody somewhere decided that that applied to Amish people in Ohio and Pennsylvania. And it doesn't. I mean, it just doesn't, right? I mean, it just doesn't. They don't believe that if you take their picture, you took their soul. They don't believe in graven images. They don't believe their dolls don't have faces. They don't believe in statues. They don't believe in pictures. They're against human faces, what they call graven images. That's what they're against, right? So no, they don't think they took your soul. You know, that's you watch old. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? People in the chat, like you watch old movies, right? You know, it's like, you know, the explorer, the British explorer is about to take a picture of the African tribe. No, don't do it. Don't do it, Archibald. They'll think you took their soul. It's like the stupid racist thing made up for racist Hollywood movies. And anyway, I digress. But anyway, I think that was the last super chat. So there you go. There you go, folks. Well, it's been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. You know, Jamie has heard it several times. I didn't make this up. That's good. All right. I'm going to say goodnight for now, but I'll be back tomorrow night. I always do streams on the weekends. So it's going to be good. Talk to you all soon. We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back. Against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.